see the back of my ute.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. Forgive me if I race through this fairly quickly because I do want to leave a little bit of space in the program for some questions. First, let me acknowledge we are on stolen land. This land was never ceded by the traditional Aboriginal owners, the Palawa and Pakana people. I want to acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, those who never made it to elder status because of the genocide that occurred in Tasmania, and also to acknowledge, and we don't do this very often, but Aboriginal science and Aboriginal knowledge and ways of interacting with the environment around us. Okay, so let me begin. Alexa set us a fantastic foundation with the idea of the economics behind this. Let's look at the legal framing, which is what Jeff asked me to do. It's the law. So what about the legal framing here is important for us when we're thinking about responses? Well, the State of the Environment report is a key component of Tasmania's planning system. It's really important to remember this. There have been a number of reports that have been prepared since the first report commenced in 1993. The first one was released in 97, followed by 2003, 2009, and then more recently 2024. Under the law, we're supposed to do this every 5 years. But even with a cognitive load, like we heard before, you can probably do some simple math there and realise we haven't been doing it every 5 years. Importantly also here to pick up is that it's the Commission, the Tasmanian Planning Commission, who is responsible overall for the State of Environment reporting. And the reporting must include, so this is what I really want to draw to your attention here, recommendations for future action, the achievement of resource management objectives, and the reporting of conditions, trends, and overall changes in the environment. Okay, a bit more background. I won't go through all the text. You can read faster than I can speak. Key here are the images that I've chosen to represent. If you look at the State of Environment report, there's lots of glossy, lovely images of forests and waterways. What we don't see is the clear felling of old growth forest, for example. The Commission is an independent statutory authority. It must table the report to Parliament through the Minister within 15 days of sitting. And important also to remember here is that this State of Environment report was prepared by experts at arm's length from government. Sorry, another really unpopular image when we talk about the environment and aquaculture and the destruction of benthic marine environments. The 2024 report was provided to the Minister of Housing and Planning. You can see the dates here. It was tabled in Parliament and then made available to the public. There is presently an independent audit of the quality assurance processes of the report. It's said on the Commission website this should happen by October, hasn't happened yet. And importantly, this audit will inform the terms of reference for the next State of the Environment report. So why does this matter? Well, if we kick up enough stink about this existing State of the Environment report and we point out some of the holes in the report, then we might be able to influence the next State of the Environment report through the terms of reference. Let me pause here just for a second and say that none of my critique that follows is directed at the people who prepared this report. Some of my colleagues who I deeply admire, they've done fantastic work. It is a beautiful piece of environmental reporting, but there are holes. Okay, in bold here are the key areas that I've pulled out of the State of Environment report in terms of its framing. Protecting the environment means protecting the Tasmanian community and livelihoods now and into the future. So livelihoods is important here in the framing. We must work together and it's important that action is taken. Okay? So here is a focus on implementation and action. Finally, not only to conserve, protect nature, but also to restore nature and ensure that this is maintained and strengthened. Okay, so that's in the State of Environment report. There's a series of objectives in the Tasmanian planning system that are part of the State Policies and Projects Act of 1993. 5 objectives, in fact, to promote sustainable development and the maintenance of ecological processes and genetic diversity, provide for fair, orderly and sustainable use and development of our resources, to encourage public involvement in resource management and planning, facilitate economic development, and promote the sharing of responsibility. The resource management and planning system, the state's planning system, these objectives include a definition of sustainable development, and there's a focus on Tasmania's environmental, economic and social needs. So when we look at the State of Environment report, let's keep in mind that it's more than just the environment. Also, let's keep in mind the broad definition of the environment, everything that surrounds us, right? So we're in the environment right now. Okay, this also is from the State of Environment report. I don't want to dwell on this other than to point out that they're saying that planning reforms are underway at the moment. In terms of how good those reforms are going to be, we need to be quite sceptical. And I'll show you why in what follows. Really importantly, here in the State of Environment report, page 48, they're talking about statements to support strategic planning, which we don't do very well at all in Tasmania. We still haven't prepared those regional planning strategies that we said we would. Environmental protection hazards are not particularly well represented in this report, nor are livable communities, nor is public engagement. This is beyond consultation, right? Public engagement are the words they're using here. Okay, and we have a raft of legislation. I'm not going to read all this out, but there's a raft of legislation that's involved here in the State of Environment reporting. Again, some really unpopular pictures, I'm sorry, of things like Mordian skate, handfish, orange-bellied parrots, and clear felling of forests, which maybe we should be putting into our State of Environment reporting. Okay, so what's missing from a quick look at this 210-page document? Where are the towns and cities? I'm sorry, but if this report is situated as part of the planning system of Tasmania, where are the towns and cities? There's nothing in the State of Environment report about towns and cities. It's a huge hole, despite the fact that the first 2 reports had sections on settlements and people and culture. Where are the human issues? Let's take life expectancy as one measure. The life expectancy of the wealthiest suburbs in Hobart, places like Sandy Bay and South Hobart, the life expectancy median is 87 years of age. Now that's on par with the wealthiest parts of the world, Monaco, Hong Kong. Travel 20 kilometres down the road to Bridgewater, Brighton, the life expectancy is 67 years of age.
Shame.
That's a 20-year difference. Every 1 kilometre you travel north, you lose a year of your life. Okay, let's keep that in mind. Where's the talk about environmental injustice? So what do I mean by that? I mean that the quality of our environments is not equal across our cities and across our societies. People who have lower incomes, who are migrants, people of colour, live in worse quality environments. There's white privilege at work here. Okay, and then finally, where are the feedback mechanisms here? It's all good to report this, but how do we ensure that we take action, like it said at the beginning of the State Environment report? Surely the idea here is to measure how well we've done, to ensure that these indicators are the same indicators as used in previous reports, are the same indicators that we use in the Commonwealth State of Environment program, and that we look at those past recommendations and we see if they've been implemented or not, right? But we're not doing that. Okay, what I want to do is just quickly walk you through a case example of urban trees and vegetation, an indicator that we might use in future State of the Environment reporting. And let's keep in mind this fact that environmental quality is not equally distributed across our society. These images are from recent events across the Northern Hemisphere showing that we have had extreme heat events in the last few years. It's the hottest on this planet in recorded history. And when we look to the future, these years we have now are going to be the cooler ones on record. What you can see here are the heat waves that affected the Northern Hemisphere, which killed about 70,000 people, 70,000 excess deaths from these heat waves. In fact, they've been called the silent killer in Australia. Heat waves kill more Australians than all other natural hazards. In fact, if you add all the other natural hazards together, the deaths that arise from those, bushfires, flooding, this kind of stuff, heat waves kill more people than all those other natural hazards combined. Yet we don't report them. The people most at risk of disease and death include older people, people who are older than 65 years of age, due to physiological differences, less able to perspire, so less able to cool down, young children under 4 years of age, people who are outdoor workers, seasonal workers, migrant workers, and people on lower incomes who can't use air conditioning to cool their houses. These heatwave impacts are not equally distributed across our cities because of the way that our cities are built. Paved areas in our cities can increase up to 2/3 of the environment in a city, and green areas can fall below 16%. Why is this important? Well, with every 1 degree rise in temperature above 20 degrees Celsius, this is a UK study, there's a 3% increase in mortality. In Tasmania, we see a 9% increase in mortality. This is some amazing work done by the Menzies Institute, a 9% increase in mortality for low intensity heat waves. So we're talking just high 20s, okay? 9% increase. The planning policies we have that are designed to accommodate this population rise we have by containing that population in our existing urban areas, increasing density, are also making us more at risk of heat impacts. This is called the surface urban heat island effect. But there's fortunately some things we can do. So even though cities are up to 15 degrees warmer than the surrounding countryside, trees can cool roads by up to 20 degrees Celsius just through shading. And they can cool the ambient temperature that we have around us by somewhere between 8 degrees, maybe a bit higher, depending on the kinds of trees and the tree canopy. They're like natural air conditioners. Okay, I'm going to skip through a bunch of stuff because I'm conscious of time and I do want to make sure we're on the program. But it's getting hotter in Tasmania. Through our climate change reporting, we are seeing that by 2100, depending on the emissions scenarios, and we're still tracking on a high scenario, it could be up to 2 degrees warmer. It's also getting drier. Our rainfall patterns are changing. And the bottom line is we're more prone to heat and heat wave effects, even here in Tasmania. If we look at our analogue cities, this is work from the CSIRO, what we can see is the future climate of Launceston, which I'm going to dig into now, is going to be more like Wagga Wagga in outback New South Wales by mid-century. Beyond that, it'll get hotter and drier. So rather than a list of words, these are the people I want you to think about when we work through the remainder of this presentation this morning. People like Aboriginal people, homeless people, migrants, older people, people with disability, renters on insecure tenure, elderly people are more at risk of heat impacts. And the key sustainable development goals I want you to think about, number 11, sustainable cities and communities, but there's a range of other sustainable development goals that apply to this too. There's 2 domains of action we can take. Remember, I talked about we need to take action from the State of Environment reporting, mitigation and adaptation. Again, I'm not going to drill into this in great detail, other than to point out that greening and green space, either through forest carbon sinks or providing parks and trees, are a way of helping us adapt to these future heat impacts. There's a range of other ones which are picked up in the State of Environment report, such as water-sensitive urban design, for example. All right, let's quickly skip through this to look at some tree benefits. Trees can help us regulate ambient temperatures, as I just pointed out. They can also soak up stormwater, so there's big economic benefits here. We know that areas of road that have good tree canopy cover last longer, okay? So there's an economic dividend here. They will last longer in time. It's a way to benefit our infrastructure. They can also reduce morbidity and mortality, but promote greater conviviality and interaction between people. Parts of cities that are greener have lower levels of domestic violence. And there's economic benefits here in terms of things like reducing energy expenses, increasing property values, substantial increases in property values with properties that have trees outside. But they're not without their costs. So, for example, we can have things like magpie swooping on the mainland, or an increase in volatile organic compounds if we plant the wrong trees in the wrong places. So implementation matters, as I've been trying to say here this morning. There's 4 things to think about when I show you what follows next from some environmental monitoring perspectives. Location, the right trees in the right place, people's values and preferences about tree planting, and making sure we have the institutional capacity to support what needs to be done. If we don't have the people and we don't have the money, it's going to be very hard to take this kind of action. Right, let's focus on the city of Launceston just to begin to wrap up. Launceston is a pretty amazing city. It has lots of its heritage architecture still in place. The population of Launceston, about 70,000 people from the 2021 census. Now, interestingly, when I pointed out at the beginning of my presentation, where are the cities, where are the people? Tasmania is a predominantly urban society, despite the myths. 65% of Tasmania's population live in the 4 big cities. When we look at settlements over 1,000 people in size, that rises to about 80%. How does this compare with Australia? 80% of Australians live in the major cities. 96% of Australians live in towns and cities. Okay, so we are actually an urban society. When we look at Launceston, this is the kind of built environment you'll see. Amazing heritage buildings. What we see all around Australia, black roofs, black walls, no trees in the new suburban developments, and the housing that's been constructed through to the 1990s, especially housing units that are affordable, very little in the way of vegetation cover. This is a story right across Tasmania and right across Australia. As we've sought to accommodate population density, for example, taking a block much like this one in Sorell, which had a single house on it, we produced 31 units, and it's fence to front door concrete with no room for trees. This is an example of Centrecare Evolve housing out at Bridgewater, much better. There's still some green space there, but again, not much room for deep planting and still black roofs. So what are these indicators we need to think about when we're considering state of the environment monitoring for heat? Well, obviously our built form and vegetation cover, but also things like income, housing tenure and housing security, whether you're dependent on welfare, education levels, a range of indicators. This is Susan Cutter's amazing work. So as I begin to wrap up, let's think about some of these indicators and how we can know who lives in areas that are more heat prone in Tasmania and what we might do about this. We've used some pretty special remote sensing techniques. We've used satellite imagery from the Landsat satellite and also from Maxar satellite imagery, which is what Google uses in Google Maps. We ran it through a computer algorithm with our partners GeoNeon here in Hobart, a startup company. We're able to detect trees to a 50 centimetre resolution at a 95% level of accuracy. Okay, so this is very high precision mapping. And what we've done is we've mapped the tree canopy layer across Launceston and big parts of Hobart. And we've also compared this to the index of relative advantage and disadvantage from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, which shows us where people who are better off and worse off live. And we ran some policy workshops with policymakers to do some co-design. Remember this implementation question, how do we fix these problems? All right, what do we find? Tree canopy cover in Launceston is at 19%. How does that compare with Melbourne? Well, aspirations from Melbourne are up around the 40% is what they want to see in terms of tree canopy cover. Hobart is a bit better than Launceston. But here's that uneven spatial distribution I was talking about. The wealthiest parts of Launceston, places like Prospect, for example, have 44% tree canopy cover in those suburbs. And here's the image here that shows that. The northern suburbs, places like Newnham and Invermay, down to 7% tree canopy cover. Okay, so there's a huge uneven distribution there. Now, if we compare this tree canopy cover with the index of relative advantage and disadvantage that I've just talked about from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, we can have a look at how the two align. And we find that same mismatch that we see around the world, with wealthier people living in leafier suburbs, people who are low-income earners and migrants being disproportionately exposed to high land surface temperatures. And this is the Landsat satellite imagery here. A caveat, this is at 11 o'clock in the morning in Launceston when Landsat is directly overhead. So we're not picking up the peak heat in the day. What we're seeing here are variations up and down, above and below, the median land surface temperature for the city. And we've done the same anomaly for Hobart, and we've mapped urban heat across Hobart and Launceston. And you can see that the heat is associated with areas of higher density in our cities. The same patterns hold up for schools. Schools in wealthier neighbourhoods have better tree canopy cover. So if you're a kid going to school in a poorer neighbourhood, which already struggles with teacher resources and maintenance, that kind of stuff, you're going to be in classrooms that are hotter in summer. Your learning's going to be affected. You won't do as well on test scores, and consequently you'll find it hard to get one of these better jobs that we just heard about before. How about bus stops? If we're sitting around waiting for the shit public transport system that we have in Tasmania, that's a technical term, you will see that bus stops have these same problems with tree canopy cover. So you're going to bake while you're waiting for the bus that never shows up. Right, to wrap up, we ran some community workshops. Remember the community engagement thing I said about in the State of Environment report? So we ran some community workshops, we talked with policymakers, and we sought to find out what people's tree preferences are, their awareness of tree costs, their climate change awareness, concerns about climate change, awareness of the spatial scales and temporal scales that this is occurring, and the adaptation options that they saw that might be viable. We managed to talk with lower income residents, culturally and linguistically diverse residents, primarily migrants, older people, environmental groups, the Chamber of Commerce, who was ironically driving this work, and council staff. Missing, we weren't able to talk with Aboriginal people because they are over-consulted and overloaded, and they said thank you but no thank you. LGBTQIA+ people, youth, people with disability, neurodiverse people and homeless. Nonetheless, asking these questions about tree benefits and tree costs and what they like about trees and whether we should have people pay for the privilege of having good quality trees, it looks like this were the answers. I just want to tease out some final things and then we'll wrap up. On Wellington Street, a lot of trees were planted. There's been a bit of a pushback from the community, back to Alexis's point before. I took a photograph this morning of one that had just been hacked off at the base. One of the big ones got cut down in the night. A couple of people with a chainsaw in the middle of the night cut the tree down. In fact, there's kilometres of trees that have been chainsawed in Launceston. The maintenance side has always been a big factor. A tree in the ground is lovely, but actually maintaining it in 20 years' time, that's when the hard part comes, especially when you're older. I don't know if it's the type of tree or just because it's poorly maintained, but it really annoys me when you're trying to walk along a footpath and the tree's too low and you're ducking and you're weaving and there's acorns and getting low-hanging branches and all the roots lift up the pavements and crack the curbs and destroy the footpaths. But it's probably just a method of installation or the tree itself. I can't think of a tree that I don't like physically and emotionally. Cool, so we got some room to work with here, right? We got some room to work with, that's the good news. All the trees that we're experiencing and enjoying now in Launceston were the ones that were planted 100 odd years ago. So the bottom line is there's support from our key stakeholders for tree planting. They recognise big problems like overshadowing, loss of sunlight, slip trip hazards, maintenance burdens. Nonetheless, they saw that there were benefits like making the city more beautiful, attracting birds and wildlife, improving biodiversity. Here's the good news that I want to leave you with. The City of Launceston took our work, used it in their urban greening strategy. It underpins their urban greening strategy. These are the diagrams from their urban greening strategy. It has been adopted by council at the beginning of this year, and trees are going into the ground in the northern suburbs of Launceston as we speak. This can be done, right? This can be done. So some lessons learned. It's important to recognise these problems, these holes in the State of Environment report. We must include diverse groups in decision making, not just consultation, but authentic, deep engagement. We have to shift from these short-term approaches of just measuring and informing and consulting to thinking about the longer-term perspective. How can we partner and co-design and co-manage, even if it takes longer than normal? I won't leave you with the principles of engagement. My takeaway ideas, last slide. We need to think about these national indicators in State of Environment reporting. They have to be consistent. Otherwise, we're comparing apples and oranges, right? A State of Environment report is basically toilet paper unless we take action and put the recommendations into practice, you may as well wipe your bottom with it because it's pretty much useless, right? It's only good if we implement the changes that come out of the State Environment Report. Lip service is insulting. We have to walk the talk. We must focus on joined-up solutions. I'll give you an example here of a joined-up solution. Air quality is in the State of Environment Report. They talk about particulates reducing in Tasmania, but unless we take action to do what they did in Launceston and ban fire, like wood fire heaters in our houses, and provide a source of cheap electricity for having alternative heaters, then we're going to see particulates in our atmosphere, but worse still, cowboys cutting down bushland for the wood that feeds into those wood-fired heaters, right? So we have to think about the joined-up actions that we take. And ultimately, the ambition should be working with First Nations people on regenerative futures. So I'll finish up there. Sorry if I've taken a bit longer. Thanks.
Just when you're happy, we'll just try and squeeze in one quick question. Not a comment, just a question.
Yeah. Alexis, what sort of a metric is there that we could use to manipulate GDP, the metric of GDP, that can be used like a snapshot that Jason's talking about here with like that map he threw up there last, see how the things change, or a heat map, or something like that. How can you use, is there a metric where you can use now with, instead of GDP that's more accurately future oriented?
Well, that would be the index of social and economic disadvantage that was used. So that's, I mean, that's as close as you're going to get, which is a balance between not how much, just how much is in the broad area, but who's got what. And
Yeah.
But then you'd want to be using it, then a layer on all the other UN social goal measures as well. So
I'm thinking more like for on the news every night, you know.
oh yeah.
Instead of GDP,
yeah,
because traffic jams are good for GDP.
well, I suspect if you were going to be doing it in terms of like news, the default thing, what you do is you say where you're going against each of your goals and where's your heat map of this area of socio-economic disadvantage, and that would be the approach that would move you towards the goal. So I think you're seeing the implementation.
Yeah. The one about Sandy Bay to Brighton is a good one.
Oh,
Every kilometre you die a couple of years earlier.
And then that then ties into the health and all things policy, saying if we're going to get control of the health budget, we've got to understand what are the policies we're putting in place, what is actually driving up there.
But has SOE, like, what does he use to project whether a budget deficit's going to be good in 10 years or 20? What's SOE used as a metric?
Well, I mean, Saul would be looking at the key budget measures, but that's but Saul will be focusing on that's looking at the budget, and Saul will narrowly focus on that. But then you've got to say, well, where do you want to go in terms of achieving your UN Sustainable Development Goals? And that's where it's getting the balance right between the budget, how much money you're spending, how many people are using it on what, and then what are you planning and what are they doing with it?
I guess a really good example, just quickly wrap up, is where we get our trees from in Tasmania. Do you want to take a guess where we get our trees from tree planting in Hobart and Launceston? Anyone want to hazard a guess? Victoria. We bring them in from Victoria. It's like, what? Why? Well, because people are getting older, all of the nurseries around our urban areas are closing as they're being sold off for housing. And so we need to think about how we get a pipeline of trees. Now, if we looked at putting trees and tree benefits and growing trees on the curriculum of schools, we could then start developing a pipeline of tree stock. We have elevated levels of social isolation and loneliness in Tasmania that are associated with high levels of suicide, especially among people who are older, who have retired and lost social connections. So if we put older people in touch with the kids and we're growing those trees and we begin to plant them together, now we start bringing in a whole range of things that have been previously externalised and not accounted for in a measure like GDP, right?
And I think that's right. In terms of the solution bringing back the budget is we're not going to solve any of these problems if we keep looking to the budget to write a check, because they're going to go out and do an expensive procurement process which will send them to Victoria, and instead we need a community-driven solution which doesn't require a budget ask.
Well, thank you. Sorry I went.
Okay, Christine, we'll let you do the switcheroonie with Susan.
It's very quick, Christine.
While that
Painless.
switcheroonie's going on,
I just
I'll
want to clip
remind
this
you
onto
to
you
the back.
about there, if
Then
that's okay.
obviously
If
the
not.
fridge,
Yep. Done.
and oh, sorry, I should have told you, the toilets are out into the left when you go out the doors.